Welcome, everyone, and welcome. We have with us Martha Eddy. So glad to have you here, Martha. Martha is a somatic trainer, a movement therapist, not therapist. Martha teaches dance and somatics for personal and global transformation. And she's the founder of several organizations, including the Center for Embodied Learning. And welcome, Martha. Why don't you tell us more about your work, about your organization, and kind of how you got to this place?
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, it's hard to define my work. Nobody in my family is able to come up with, what is it you do? It was actually my tax accountant in the 80s that said, I think you're a movement therapist. And it was actually before the field existed. And then in 1984, someone named Jim Spira said, there are a lot of people doing movement education that involves awareness, that involves the body-mind connection, that involves noticing how you feel or how you think in relationship to how you sense your physical being on the planet and in relationship to the planet as well. We know now, and some of us knew then, that people from cultures that weren't westernized, to use a term, have had that for a long, long time. And I'm happy to speak more to that. But basically, I had been trained in several modalities that are considered types of somatic movement education or therapy. And two of them, the two that I studied, were Laban movement analysis, developed by a woman named Irmgard Bartenieff, and part of the whole Jewish diaspora from Europe into the United States during World War II, or as it began. And then the second was developed by an occupational therapist and dancer named Bonnie Bainbridge Cohen, and she calls it body-mind centering. And she is alive and teaching today. So I put them together after 10 years of teaching in the certification programs for each, alongside each of these amazing women, Irmgard Bartenieff and Bonnie Bainbridge Cohen, and created a program that I felt was, I know the aim was, and I feel it's effective, to help people use this vast knowledge of movement awareness for working with individuals, mostly in private practice. However, many of my students have now applied dynamic embodiment, which is the second name I gave it, because first I just called it the somatic movement therapy training, because nobody else was using the term somatic movement therapy. And then I was invited to be part of the Movement Therapy Association, and my program was one of the first 9 programs, along with programs like the Alexander Method, the Feldenkrais Method, Continuum, Body-Mind Centering, the Laban Bartenieff work. And so these may be quite sounding esoteric, or you may be quite familiar with them. Everybody has different exposure. I have been in classes that I teach in university and colleges, and more recently using a term from another colleague of Western consciousness practices. So that the word soma means the living body. It comes from the Greek. It's used in Greece today, meaning the living body versus the dead body. And in English, we just have a body and it could be dead or alive. You don't know. But the soma is a living body, assumed to be self-regulating and taking care of itself. And that's the heart of this work. It's how to tap into, for free, the very nature of our being, which is to regulate, even in dire situations, even in huge stress or trauma. So I'll stop there and just say that's what I do: dynamic embodiment, somatic movement therapy. And I have it within an organization with a new name. So I don't even have the website yet. It's called the Center for Embodied Learning. It was the Center for Kinesthetic Education. Nobody at the governmental level was able to spell kinesthetic or say it. It was an embarrassment for them to like be interacting with me. And I also wasn't allowed to really register as a business with the word education unless I became a school. And I was really doing consulting, not training kids or teaching kids. So Center for Embodied Learning is the new name for what was wellnesscke.net. And that's an archive of what I did in schools for many, many years. You are muted.
Amazing. And for, I think a lot of the listeners do know, and a lot probably don't know, what is somatic awareness, and like, what does it have to do with, yeah, what does it have to do with emotional regulation?
Beautiful. So again, the soma is the living body. So becoming aware of your living body is kind of a choice. You know, the body is designed, our bodies have low brain and high brain. And many of us, when we go to the high brain, often think that's our mind, not our body, but it's part of our bodies, which is what the body mind centering is talking about. So to become aware is to choose to pay attention often to the more low brain activity. Like our walk is automatic. It has become a gait, you know, it's GAIT. We call it a gait, a certain rhythm. And yet it's not always comfortable. Some people have pain while walking, or their walk is causing them pain when they go to sit. So becoming aware of one's gait, becoming aware of your rhythm of your walking and the posture of your torso and head, neck into chest and pelvis area can be a clue into why you're in pain, for instance. And that can be then a reflection of emotional pain as well. So in the movement analysis work that I'm trained to teach and use as part of my work with all ages of people, whether infants or elders in hospice, is what is the shaping in my torso? Am I retreating? Am I advancing? Am I shrinking, narrowing, or actually enclosing? There's a slight difference between just kind of shrinking and in sideways, which we call narrowing, or enclosing, really shaping around like a baby or a pillow or whatever you might be hugging. So I'll stop there, but these are some of the things that you can become aware of, and that would be called somatic awareness.
Mm. So what I'm hearing is actually it's not all a lot of a lot of the somatic, and I know you have a question here about critiquing the somatics movement that has absolutely blown up in the last, I would say, 5 years,
Mhm.
certainly much later than 1984.
Mhm.
um, so you're not talking about sensations, you're actually talking about something that someone else could observe, like what is your body doing, as a clue to feelings you might not be in touch with.
Yes, and so it's both. It is both, and that's what happens in a class. It's interactive. We do partner work, and or even on Zoom. You know, we just see each other and we see ourselves because it's like having a mirror there. Um, there's this opportunity to both feel and sense our own bodies and what habits are there, and where there's positive sensation and where there's less desirable sensation, and shift that. But we can also see it in one another. So, as a therapist, we're often observing, and observing is multisensorial in my training. So, dynamic embodiment, we're listening to the tone of voice.
Mm.
We're even smelling kind of what is the energy coming in, or just the choices being made. Um, we teach a little bit of the rasa system from India and really working with smell. We will also not only be observing, but also possibly already at some point touching. And so getting a lot of information through tactile awareness. So, and that one, the touch one, is a place where you really interface with a person's sensation. And that's one of the main reasons we do touch, is that if someone doesn't feel, when you come in and touch, it brings awareness to that area, and awareness that has of an area that may have simply been dormant because it's functioning well or well enough, or could be numb because it's needing to be protected because there's so much pain in there.
Yeah. So what, so, you know, you've been a pioneer in this area, and you've seen the evolution over 40 years. What is your critique of, you know, this trendy somatics movement that I probably kind of noticed about 20 years ago, but I'm just seeing really taking off the last 5 years?
Yeah, I actually was talking to a executive coach the other day, and she said, "Oh, I went to your website. I thought somatics was about 5 years old. And now I'm seeing it's been around a long, long time. And you've been doing it for 40 years." And so, yes, we've been hiding for a while, waiting for the world to be ready. I have to say that when yoga took off in the United States in the 80s and 90s, I was like, whoa, they just bypassed us. Um, and I have some theories about that. One of the other things I wanted to bring up is from before, when you talked about not just feeling, but seeing, there's also the piece of not just feeling static experience, like in my posture, how I'm breathing is a pretty typical somatic intervention that is used, for instance, by some psychologists, some somatic therapists. But what makes somatic movement therapy different is that we're also looking at the kinesthetic sense, not just the proprioceptive sense. So the proprioceptive sense is telling me how tense am I and where am I positioned in space, in stillness. Whereas the kinesthetic sense is using proprioception to also integrate it with the other senses I just mentioned. So I'm moving through space. So I'm noticing that with my eyes. I might be feeling it with the change in the temperature of the air as I move from one texture of air to another, these kinds of things. So those are really kind of deep in the sense that they're subtle or they're specific, but also they bridge into our experience on the planet. Like, what's my relationship to the earth? Why am I moving this way related to another person? Why am I moving back? Why am I hiding away? Why am I defensively forward? I mean, those are some classics. Of course, people could come forward out of excitement as well. So what is happening a lot is that people are just slapping the word soma onto what they do, because I think, and this is another critique that I have, so we've got the critique of the commercialization of somatic awareness or somatic work. And we also have the critique of the somatic work actually having developed out of response to, this is the critique, that the somatic work developed as a response to industrialization, that we didn't really need the kind of back care and um, body awareness that we need now when we went into factories where the repetitive movement was such that, and it was so controlled. You know, your boss came by, and if you weren't doing the action on the assembly line, then, you know, you got removed or you might have lost your job. Whereas if you're a farmer, you can take a moment, even though you might be rushing because of the rain, or, you know, you've got to get that yield and you need to move the equipment or whatever it is. If you really need to stop and take a breath, you can do that. Now, that wasn't true for sharecroppers or slaves, enslaved
Yeah.
people. So obviously, there are layers and layers of all of this. But the idea that we became more sedentary, we became more industrialized, we became more toxic from the industrial air that comes out of factories, is one reason that it seems, and there was more leisure for certain people to spend the time to go, just lie on your back, take a breath, take 20 minutes and meditate. Now do exercise, and that this is actually a privilege. So
Mm,
one critique is around who gets to do somatics and why it even exists. And the other is around using the term now that it's cool, even if you don't have any education or certification in some kind of either indigenous practice that keeps this alive and or some kind of training program that has been approved even by a professional association like ours called ISMETA.
mm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm just realizing in the 80s, I do remember body language analysis being a big thing. Which,
Mhm.
when you were saying, why am I forward? Why am I back? Like that, I remember people talking about when I was in, middle school and high school, but not about like the idea. I think I first heard the idea that emotions get stored in the body and that getting in touch with them can provide healing. I think it was in the early 2000s, people were talking about trauma resolution. And,
Mhm.
um, EMDR was, I don't know if it was new, but a lot of people were hearing about it for the first time. Um, that's when I first heard about it. And then I first started, the first technique I ever used was called focusing, which I learned
Mhm.
about in, I think, 2010. Um, which is just basic like inner dialogue with your body sensations. It's very cool, and nobody gives it credit when it seems like that's what they're doing. Um, but I'm hearing like so. Okay, so your critique is not so much that people are, well, it is partly that people are making things up, but it's not like that there's a specific thing that people are saying that you're like, no, 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 that doesn't work. It's more that people are being very casual with the word.
Yeah, and doing the simplest things without necessarily understanding the larger context of movement,
Mm,
whether it's anatomical, whether it's having a framework for observing movement, whether it is really taking time to help people go into their bodies and relate it to either different parts. We call it connectivity. How is your head related to your pelvis? Or related to emotions, as you're talking about, or related to daily habits.
mm,
So there's usually a journey when you do somatic work. It's a kind of journey, it's a kind of awakening to self. And so if if one's yoga practice has already had that for you, one could say yoga is somatic with a cap, not the capital S, but with a small s. It is somatic. It's of the body and it's bringing awareness to the body and mind connection. Um, if your yoga practice has been more like a fitness training, then it's actually not so somatic. It's really just an exercise program. Yeah.
interesting.
And people ask me about that, about dance all the time too. Isn't dance automatically somatic? There are so many dancers that just copy the choreographer or the teacher and have no sense of their own bodies, sadly, and just are goal oriented. Can I get my leg higher in space? It's very mechanical. And it's been powerful as a dance educator to be around younger dancers and open them up to this other world because then they're really fast learners. It's like they become the healers once they realize that they can follow their body for knowledge and wisdom versus just become utilitarian and doing somebody else's will with their bodies.
Fascinating. So, with these various somatic practices, how can they make a difference for activists?
Yeah. So there have been people and activists who have been leading this connection, I'll simply say. And one of the newer ones, probably 10, maybe 15 years old, I'm not sure the history, is the NAP Ministry. So napministry.com, the idea that rest is resistance is such a beautiful, beautiful encapsulation of the kind of what we call in the movement analysis world, we have a principle that out of exertion, there needs to be recuperation. And even in industry, one could be doing that repetitive action, but as long as you understand this action is strong and this action is a moment, this phrase, this part of the movement phrase is a recuperation where you can take a breath in and then exert down, then you're usually able to perform that action comfortably in your body for longer.
Mm.
Um,
Even, and I learned this. I live in Willimantic, Connecticut, where we used to have thread mills in the 1700s and 1800s, and even actually the last one closed in the 1970s or 80s. And we have a thread mill museum. And one of the times I went there, I learned that it was the foreman who invented brakes, because they found that if they gave especially children breaks, they would actually produce more in a day. So it's not even just that there's part of your job that's relatively restful, it's actually making space for actual rest makes you stronger.
exactly. Exactly. And I read an article once on the history of coffee breaks, and it came from some of the same research. And then I think the coffee
I was about to
industry.
say coffee is a productivity drug
Yeah,
anyway.
exactly. And then it moved things along in that sense. Yeah, so that's often what we think of as a break or as recuperative is sleep or stopping and changing activity. And so there's this whole continuum. You can have recuperation within the activity. You can have recuperation between activities. You can have activities that are recuperative. And you can also have this period where you're, quote, doing nothing, but is a very important dream time where many things can be percolating.
Mm. And so right now, a lot of people are under stress. We're recording this November 13th. A lot of progressives are stressed out about a second Trump presidency specifically. There's also all kinds of atrocities happening in the Middle East, probably other places that we're not hearing about. But what can you offer people just straight up coping? Like, coping with an emotional shock through body awareness. What
Yeah.
for that?
The first, and I'll just say that my parents were community organizers. And we grew up in a neighborhood that was really poor, full of amazing, wonderful people, but much the heroin
Mm.
epidemic was happening. And at the time, there was no such thing as drug rehabilitation. So my community was central in establishing the first hospital beds for addicts. Um, so I'm saying that because I mentioned to you that my method of working is a blend of two systems. And actually, neither of my teachers spent much time sharing the history of how they came to be the brilliant people they are in the training. They were just busy training. And it was only some years later, for instance, that I found out that one teacher had actually studied with the other teacher because I kept saying they're so similar, they could really fit together well. So the Laban work with Irmgard Vartaniev was also studied by Bonnie Bainbridge Cohen as a dancer and occupational therapist. And so I started interviewing them, about this kind of history. And so for me, the history of how we get to things is important. So I would run my training programs always saying, and this came from Irmgard Vartaniev, and this came from Bonnie Bainbridge Cohen. And at one point, one of my students said, "What's your work?" And that was about 2008. I mean, I'd already been doing it for whatever that is, 30 something years, or at least 25. And I thought about it, and it took me a while to start to name some principles. And one of the principles I came up with, I then realized was pretty much what my parents had been doing as community organizers. They would never have used this language. Mine was very much coming out of the principles of these two different systems, but which ones I was prioritizing. So the first we've talked about already, which is observation, seeing. But again, that word observation, and we also use the word witnessing as a kind of compassionate being together rather than observing with judgment or for assessment. I mean, you can assess, that's not a bad thing, but if it's with judgment versus compassion, there's a very different tone. So observing is a first step. And so that's what I would say to anybody in stress is the first thing is to notice, to really take a moment to notice one's body. So for instance, last night I was in a group, an educational group of about maximum 18 people on Zoom, where people representing the Wampanoag tribe in eastern Massachusetts were talking about the different atrocities in their life and the different oppressions, both historically over hundreds of years, as well as present day. And one of the participants, an African American woman, spoke up at the end and shared how important it is to just let our bodies feel what we feel, not try to brace against it, but really go in and notice, name it, see it. So that's the observe phase. That's the attuning with. That's the witnessing on a multisensorial level. What is the sensation? What does it look like if you happen to be seeing it? What does it feel like from the inside in terms of movement, of breath, or lack of movement? The startle reflex is pulling the shoulders up and back and lifting. Sometimes this is hiding or depression. I give up. I'm being, again, highly generalizing. You can also just be looking down because you need something. But that observation phase is really important. Then in dynamic embodiment, we go from the O of observation to the S of support. And support, I have found over the years, has, I'm not going to say A and B, but two parts. And so it doesn't really even matter which order. You might be really in touch with, oh my gosh, my lower back hurts. I need a pillow behind my lower back. So even that, like I've been like this, and I just go and I get a pillow and I put it behind my lower back where I'm hurting. I've given myself something. I've taken care of myself. There's a little extra support. So just taking that in, that I can help myself and I can support myself. And now feel it, feel how that feels, and even adjust it if it's not quite right. So that's part of support. So that's supporting what wasn't really working. If your lower back hurt and you need something to lean against, or you want some support for that curve in the lumbar spine, that's one. The other is also noticing what is working. So the observe can move into acknowledgement, appreciation, and gratitude. We were talking earlier about the importance of gratitude in the moment of hard times. So what is working well in my body would be somatic gratitude. So, okay, my legs, both of my feet are on the floor. That's good. Not that you can always cross your legs and stuff, but when you can get both feet on the ground and allow some weight to pass into the earth, whether it's 7 stories up or right there on the planet, on the soil or the concrete, over the soil, is literally communicating with us. So if we can take a moment and register that the earth and the gravitational pull is a supportive connection, that can be healing. And then the final letter, because it's oso, which means bear in Spanish, and that is kind of I don't know, an endearment to me. I had dreams about bears when I was little. And it's about offering options. You can be offering them to yourself. You can be offering them to someone else. that you're helping, that you're engaged with this somatic awareness or this self-regulation process, whether this co-regulation process, because as I take care of myself, as I look at you, I would hope that it kind of is different than you watching me just kind of like standing like this for an hour. So as I relax, maybe there's some hard moments where maybe I'm tearing or something else is coming up, but eventually I'm more true and authentic to my own experience. I would hope that it actually resonates for others. So the offering options could be anything. It's like, well, let's go do something together. Let's play. Let's put on music and dance. Um, let's journal write. That's writing is a kinesthetic experience, even digital writing, et cetera, et cetera. Yeah.
Thank you. I think we're getting close to the end of our time. Yeah, I ask two questions at the end. One is, and I'll just ask both of them so that we can be responsible for time. The first is, what would you say to people about getting in touch with their purpose? And then the second question is, tell us about your free gift.
One of the things, I think I just used the word authentic, and authenticity, it turns out in some research, is the ultimate measure of one's spiritual status, if you want to use that word, or just one's spirituality. And so I found that really interesting when people were studying who are truly spiritual people that are like going to live a 90% spiritual life. They are authentic with themselves. So this somatic approach is a way to be more authentic because we're literally embracing not just ideas that could be coming from other places, but literally those ideas embodied or anything else in our bodies that are true to our own experience. So purpose can be generated from that when you are in touch with how you're feeling, who you are, what your body sensations are, what feels good. You're often more in touch with your gifts. And that's what we do in dynamic embodiment. We celebrate everybody's gifts. You're not going to hear about a lot of dynamic embodiment practitioners out there in the world. They're because there are about 140 of them, but they register as somatic movement therapists. So they have that professional identity. But they also create their own systems, whether it's moving through the steps or talking about substance abuse or doing work with dance or working in business, helping young, small entrepreneurial businesses or big, large ones move into new places using the OSO model. So basically, you can find your purpose by what feels good in your body. Yeah. And so, yeah, so I'm just delighted that you asked whether or not we had anything we could offer. And I do have classes, many classes. So there are dance classes that are just fun and also deep investigative kind of 1 hour adventures, free moving for life classes that are more somatic fitness. However, for this, I really wanted to, and that's called Moving for Life, by the way. For this, I wanted to really offer something special that's not free, which is a class in taking care of vision of your eyes. Things like palming, things like doing different exercises, things like just noticing the sensation in your eyes. We call the eyes the window to our soul, so also relating to purpose. And I love the eyes because they have all body systems in them. They're an organ, they're part of the nervous system, there are muscles, there are glandular components in terms of dilation of the pupil and constriction. So we get into all of these kinds of relationships with self. And there's a crystalline, semi-crystalline lens, our visual lens inside our eyes. So they're very special. So I'd like to invite you to have access for free to one of our short, it's usually about 30 to 40-minute videos around taking care of your eyes.
Hmm. Well, thank you, Martha. It's very wonderful to be with you and just get your wisdom and some of the history. And it's really sparked my imagination. I hope it's done that for everybody watching.
Beautiful. Thank you. Thank you for all you do.